The Enchanted Hourglass. The kingdom of Elythria was a jewel of verdant hills and sparkling rivers, but its beauty was a fragile veneer. Beneath the gilded surface, the royal palace bore a silent sentinel of despair, an ancient hourglass, perched on its pedestal in the Hall of Ancestors. Its sands, glinting faintly like liquid silver, had flowed ceaselessly for centuries. No one could move it, no spell could destroy it, and no scholar could unravel its origin. To all who gazed upon it, the hourglass seemed less an object and more a living, breathing threat. The curse tied to it was older than memory, whispered in the shadows of courtly halls. On the eve of a prince's 25th year, the sands shall cease, and darkness will claim Elythria. Kings had tried to flee from the prophecy, others to defy it, but none had succeeded. The curse was a coiled serpent that struck true at the appointed hour. Kingdoms that challenged it fell into ruin, and their stories were swallowed by history. Prince Kael was born into this looming doom, his fate bound to the hourglass. From his earliest years, he had felt its weight, though it had no voice, no movement beyond the steady trickle of sand. It sat in silence, yet it seemed to watch him, its presence inescapable. At night, Kael dreamed of the sands falling faster, of shadowy tendrils creeping from the glass to devour his world. By day, he studied with his tutors and sparred with knights, his resolve honed not by ambition, but by necessity. As the prince's 25th birthday neared, the kingdom held its breath. The skies above Elythria grew darker each passing day, heavy with clouds that blocked even the midday sun. Crops withered in the fields, and the people whispered of omens, crows gathering in the castle's spires, shadows stretching unnaturally long. The court magicians scoured ancient tomes for answers, but the prophecy's origin eluded them, and the curse's solution remained an enigma. Kael, however, had grown tired of waiting. Unlike his forebears, he refused to accept the curse as unchangeable. On the eve of his birthday, he stood before his father, King Aldrin, in the great throne room. The air smelled of wax and dust, and the faint echo of footsteps lingered like ghosts in the high-vaulted ceilings. "I must leave, father," Kael said, his voice firm despite the knot in his chest. "If I stay, the curse will claim us all." The king, a man weathered by years of sorrow, met his son's gaze with weary eyes. "There is no escaping it, my son. The curse is woven into our blood. Where will you go? What will you do that generations before you could not?" Kael hesitated, then spoke words he had dared not utter until now. "I will seek the Sorceress." A hush fell over the room, broken only by the crackling of the hearth. The sorceress Lysara was a name spoken in fear, a figure of dark rumour and forbidden magic. It was said she could wield time itself, though at what cost none dared guess. The king's face darkened, his voice rising like a thunderclap. You would trust a witch who dwells in shadow and chaos? She is as likely to doom us as the curse itself. But Kael remained resolute. If she is my only hope, I will take the risk. Better to face the unknown than to surrender to darkness. Against his father's protests, Kael prepared to leave that very night. The hourglass in the Hall of Ancestors glimmered faintly as he passed it, its sands seeming to whisper a mocking farewell. Mounted on a black steed, cloaked in the twilight of a dying sun, the prince rode into the forest where the sorceress was said to dwell. The air grew colder the deeper he ventured, the trees gnarled and clawing at the sky. An unnatural mist curled around his path, and the world fell silent, save for the pounding of his horse's hooves. It was as though he had crossed into another realm, one where time itself faltered. And then, in the heart of the mist, a figure emerged. She stood shrouded in dark robes, her face pale as moonlight, and her eyes glinting like shards of ice. Her presence was both beautiful and terrible, her voice soft yet commanding as she spoke. I have been waiting for you, Prince Kael. The hourglass has summoned us both. Kael dismounted, his breath visible in the frigid air. He met her gaze and said, If you know of the hourglass, then you know why I have come. Will you help me? The sorceress smiled, a curve of her lips that held no warmth. Help you? She echoed. I can do more than that. But know this, Prince. Breaking the curse will cost you dearly. Are you prepared to pay the price? Kael hesitated, but only for a moment. The faces of his people, his family, and the lands he was sworn to protect flashed in his mind. I am prepared, he said, though his heart quaked. Then follow me, Lysara said, her voice carrying an ominous edge. Time is not on your side. And with that, she turned, disappearing into the mist. The path through the mist wound like a serpent, twisting and narrowing until it felt as though the world itself closed in. Lysara moved with uncanny grace, her dark robes trailing through the fog, untouched by the brambles and roots that seemed to claw at Kael with every step. The forest, so alive with its tangled cacophony beyond its edges, had fallen utterly silent, save for the soft crunch of his boots and the rhythmic clink of the sword at his side. They came upon a clearing, sudden and jarring in its stillness. A solitary tree stood at its center, its gnarled branches stretching like skeletal fingers towards the heavens. Beneath it sat a stone table, its surface etched with runes that shimmered faintly in the pale light. Lysara gestured for Kael to sit, her eyes flickering with a strange intensity. He obeyed, his unease growing as she placed a crystal vial filled with a swirling black mist upon the table. The vial seemed alive, the darkness within shifting and pulsing as though eager to escape. She sat across from him, her gaze piercing, her voice low and steady as she spoke. "This," she began, gesturing to the vial, "is the shadow of time itself, distilled from centuries of curses, forgotten regrets, and shattered dreams. It is the essence of what binds your kingdom to its fate." Kael stared at the vial, his hands tightening into fists. "And it can break the curse?" "It can," Lysara replied, her tone measured. "But its power cannot be wielded without cost. The curse was forged with hatred, and hatred demands a sacrifice. To shatter it, you must give up something you hold most dear." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Kael's mind raced. His life was no longer his own. It belonged to his people, his family, the legacy of Elythria. What could he give that would satisfy the demands of a magic so dark and ancient? "What must I sacrifice?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lysara's expression softened for the first time, though her eyes held a glint of something he could not name. Pity, perhaps, or regret. "That," she said, "is for the magic to decide. The price is yours to pay, but it will not be revealed until the deed is done." Kael leaned back, the weight of her words pressing down on him like the ironclad grip of the hourglass's curse. Yet, what choice did he have? The kingdom was withering, his people succumbing to despair. To falter now would mean condemning them all. "I accept," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Lysara gave a slight nod, her fingers tracing one of the glowing runes on the table. The air grew heavier, the mist swirling around them like restless spirits. "Then we begin." She drew a dagger from within her robes, its blade black as midnight and humming faintly with energy. She pricked her own finger, a single drop of blood beading and falling onto the vial. The mist within surged violently, its dark tendrils pressing against the glass as though trying to escape. "Take my hand," Lysara commanded. Kael hesitated, then grasped her outstretched hand. Her skin was cold, her grip firm. The moment their hands touched, a sharp pain lanced through him, and the world around them dissolved into darkness. In the void, visions danced before his eyes. The hourglass, its sands flowing backward. A labyrinth of shifting shadows. A voice whispering a name he could not catch. The darkness pressed in, suffocating and endless, but Lysara's voice cut through it, steady and unwavering. "Kael," she said, "the answers lie within the Labyrinth of Shadows. The hourglass's creator awaits there, hidden behind veils of time and vengeance. Only by unearthing the truth of the curse can it be undone." The void shattered like glass, and Kael found himself back in the clearing. The vial was gone, its contents absorbed into the air, leaving behind an unnatural chill. Lysara released his hand, her gaze more distant now, as though a part of her had been drained in the ritual. "The labyrinth lies beyond the edges of this forest," she said. "Its entrance is marked by twin obelisks of obsidian, veiled in eternal twilight. The journey will test every fragment of your will, Prince. Shadows will twist your mind, and the truth you seek may be more than you can bear." Kael nodded. His resolve hardened despite the unease gnawing at him. "And you? Will you come with me?" Lysara's lips curved into a faint smile, one that held no warmth. "I am bound to this path as you are, though for reasons far older than you can imagine. The curse has haunted us both, and only together can we face what lies ahead." Her words, cryptic and laden with unspoken truths, lingered in his mind as they rose and prepared to leave the clearing. The shadows seemed to watch them, shifting ever so slightly, as though the forest itself recognized the pact they had made. The clock was ticking, and the midnight hour drew closer with every step. Without another word, the prince and the sorceress vanished into the mist, their fates entwined in the threads of time and destiny. The path to the Labyrinth of Shadows was as foreboding as its name. The twin obsidian obelisks rose like dark sentinels against the twilight, their surfaces etched with markings that seemed to pulse faintly in rhythm with Kael's heartbeat. The air was cold here, sharp and metallic, as if it carried whispers of ancient voices trapped between realms. Lysara stood beside him, her face impassive, but her eyes glinting with an unreadable emotion. "Once we enter," she said, her voice low and measured, "the labyrinth will sense us. It will test our resolve and our sanity. If your heart falters, it will consume you." Kael nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Then we don't falter." Without another word, they stepped between the obelisks. The world shifted abruptly, as though they had plunged into a realm untethered from reality. The labyrinth stretched endlessly before them, its walls of black stone gleaming like glass and seeming to shift when unobserved. A faint luminescence emanated from cracks in the floor, casting eerie, wavering shadows that danced like restless phantoms. The air was heavy, laden with a silence that felt alive. As they moved forward, the silence gave way to whispers, faint and indistinct at first, but growing louder with every step. The voices seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, speaking in languages Kael did not know, but somehow understood. "They know we are here," Lysara murmured, her tone unreadable. "The labyrinth feeds on fear and doubt. Stay focused." Kael's grip tightened on the hilt of his sword as the whispers grew more insidious. The shadows on the walls began to take shape, forming fleeting images. His father's disappointed gaze, the faces of his people twisted in anguish, and finally, the hourglass, its sands flowing faster and faster. "Kael!" a voice called, clear and familiar. It was his mother's voice, soft and warm, pulling at his memories. "Why do you leave us? Come back." He stopped, his chest tightening. The image of his mother appeared in the shifting shadows, her arms outstretched, her expression pleading. It felt so real, so vivid, that he took an involuntary step forward. "Stop!" Lysara snapped, her hand gripping his arm. Her eyes blazed with urgency. "It is an illusion. The labyrinth seeks to ensnare you." Kael blinked, and the image shattered like glass, leaving only the cold, unyielding walls. He exhaled sharply, his breath visible in the icy air. It felt so real. "It always does," Lysara said. "That is its nature, to twist your mind until you cannot tell what is real and what is false." They pressed on, the labyrinth's corridors growing more disorienting. At times the walls seemed to close in, forcing them to squeeze through narrow passages. At others, the space expanded into vast, echoing chambers with no discernible exits. Time felt meaningless here, the weight of their task growing heavier with every step. In the heart of the labyrinth, they came upon a vast chamber bathed in an unnatural light. At its center stood an obsidian pedestal, and upon it lay an ancient book bound in cracked leather. The whispers in the air rose to a deafening crescendo as they approached. "This is it," Lysara said, her voice tinged with both awe and dread. "The Book of Shadows. It holds the truth of the curse." Kael hesitated. "What if it's another illusion?" "It is not," Lysara replied. "But the truth it holds may be more terrible than any lie." As Kael reached for the book, the shadows around the chamber coalesced, forming a towering figure of writhing darkness. Its hollow eyes glowed with malevolent light, and its voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Who dares disturb the Labyrinth of Shadows?" it demanded, its words reverberating through the chamber. Kael drew his sword, the blade gleaming faintly in the strange light. "We seek the truth of the hourglass and the curse upon Elythria." The shadow laughed, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground. "Truth? There is no truth without suffering. You come seeking answers, but are you prepared for what they will cost?" "I am," Kael said, though his voice betrayed the tremor of uncertainty beneath his resolve. The shadow loomed closer, its form shifting and crackling with energy. "Then prove it. Speak the name of the one who cast the curse, and I will grant you passage." Kael froze. The name. The name had been erased from history, lost to time's relentless tide. He looked to Lysara, whose expression had turned grave. "I know the name," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the shadow's thunderous presence. "But to speak it aloud will demand a sacrifice, a piece of my very being." Kael's heart clenched. "You don't have to do this." "I do," Lysara interrupted, her eyes locking with his. "The curse binds us both, Kael. Without the truth, we are lost." She stepped forward, her voice steady as she spoke the name. "Elythria." The shadow froze, its form unraveling as the name echoed through the chamber. The air shifted, the oppressive weight lifting as the figure dissolved into nothingness. The whispers fell silent. The book opened on its own, its pages flipping rapidly before settling on a single passage. Kael and Lysara leaned in, the truth of the curse finally laid bare before them, and what they saw chilled them to their cores. The pages of the book glowed faintly, the ink upon them shifting as though alive, forming words that seemed to breathe with the weight of ancient secrets. Kael and Lysara stood side by side, their shadows cast long against the walls of the chamber. As the words solidified into legible form, an ominous silence filled the space, and Kael felt the air grow heavier, as if the labyrinth itself held its breath. The passage began with a single line, its meaning stark and unforgiving. Curses are born not of hatred, but of love betrayed. Kael's fingers hovered over the book, his pulse quickening. Lysara's expression hardened, her jaw tight as she read the words aloud. Her voice carried a resonance that seemed to ripple through the labyrinth. Elythria was once a healer, Lysara began, her tone measured yet edged with sorrow. Beloved of Elythria's first king, Erindor. Their union was blessed by the stars themselves, and for a time they ruled together in harmony. But power breeds greed, and Erindor grew restless. Kael leaned closer, his mind piecing together the fragments of a story buried in the kingdom's forgotten annals. What happened to her? Lysara hesitated, her gaze fixed on the book. He betrayed her. Elythria possessed a gift, an hourglass that controlled time itself. It allowed her to heal the sick, to undo moments of pain and suffering. Erindor, blinded by ambition, sought to use the hourglass as a weapon. When she refused, he accused her of witchcraft, casting her out to die in exile. The book's pages turned again, revealing an illustration. A woman shrouded in shadows, holding the hourglass as flames consumed the world around her. Below it, the text continued. In her final moments, Elythria cursed Elythria with her dying breath. She bound the hourglass to the kingdom's bloodline, ensuring that no ruler would escape the weight of their sins. The sands of the hourglass would flow until the blood of a willing sacrifice broke the cycle. Kael's breath hitched as the realization struck him. The curse. It demands more than a name. It demands blood. Lysara's expression darkened, her voice lowering to a whisper. Not just any blood, Kael. It demands the blood of one who is bound to the hourglass, one who carries its burden. Kael staggered back, the truth crashing over him like a tidal wave. You're saying the curse can only be broken if I... Sacrifice yourself, Lysara finished, her tone steady but laced with an undercurrent of pain. Your life for the kingdom's freedom. The chamber seemed to tilt, the weight of the revelation threatening to crush him. Kael gripped the edge of the pedestal, his knuckles white. No, he said, shaking his head. There has to be another way. Lysara stepped closer, her expression unreadable. The curse was born of betrayal, Kael. Only through an act of pure sacrifice can it be undone. If you do not break it, the darkness will consume Elythria, and the cycle will begin anew. Kael's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. He thought of his father, his people, the land he had sworn to protect. But more than that, he thought of Lysara, her unyielding strength, her willingness to stand beside him in the face of unimaginable odds. "There's something you're not telling me," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Why are you here, Lysara? What does the curse mean to you?" Her gaze faltered for the first time, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. She turned away, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because Elythria was my mother." The words hung in the air like a blade poised to strike. Kael stared at her, his mind reeling. "You're her daughter. How is that possible?" "She bound herself to the hourglass," Lysara said, her tone tinged with sorrow. "When she cast the curse, a fragment of her soul was left behind. I am what remains of her, a shadow of her grief, her fury, her love. I was born from the hourglass itself." Kael stepped toward her, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "And yet you stand here, helping me. Why?" Lysara met his gaze, her eyes glinting with a mixture of resolve and sorrow. "Because I have lived in the shadow of her curse for centuries, watching as the bloodline repeated its sins. I want it to end, Kael. For her. For you. For Elythria." The book's final page turned, revealing a single line. "The sands stop when the clock strikes 12. Choose wisely, for time bows to no one." Kael closed his eyes, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. Midnight was fast approaching, and the path forward was clear. But could he make the ultimate sacrifice, knowing what it would cost? "I won't let Elythria fall," he said finally, his voice firm. "But there must be another way." Lysara's gaze softened, a flicker of hope sparking in her eyes. "Then we must face the hourglass together. But be warned, Kael. The truth you hold now is both your weapon and your curse." The chamber trembled, the labyrinth shifting once more as they prepared to leave. The clock was ticking, and the midnight hour loomed closer with every step. The Hall of Ancestors stood in oppressive silence, the ancient hourglass at its center glowing faintly with a silvery, unearthly light. Its sands now flowed with a frantic urgency, spiraling downward as if compelled by unseen hands. Midnight was near, and the kingdom seemed to hold its breath, the air heavy with an impending sense of finality. Kael and Lysara stepped into the chamber, their figures framed against the dim light of flickering torches. The hourglass loomed before them, both sentinel and executioner. Kael's heart pounded in his chest, his breaths shallow and quick, but his steps did not falter. Lysara moved with a strange stillness beside him, her gaze fixed on the artifact that had haunted her existence. "It ends here," Kael said, his voice resolute despite the weight of the moment. Lysara nodded, her hands clenched at her sides. "The hourglass will test us one final time. It will not yield easily." Kael drew his sword, its blade glinting faintly in the pale glow of the hourglass. He approached it cautiously, the sands within seeming to churn faster as if aware of his presence. Lysara remained a step behind, her eyes gleaming with determination. As Kael raised his sword, a tremor rippled through the chamber, and the air grew unbearably cold. The hourglass pulsed with a dark energy, and shadows erupted from its base, coalescing into a towering form. The figure was both man and wraith, its eyes burning with the malevolent glow of ancient hatred. "I am the keeper of the curse," the shadow intoned, its voice like the grinding of stone. "You seek to break what was wrought in blood and betrayal. Do you think yourself worthy?" Kael gripped his sword tightly. "The curse has claimed enough lives. It ends tonight." The shadow laughed, a sound that reverberated through the hall like thunder. "Bold words, Prince. But you cannot destroy what you do not understand. The hourglass feeds on sacrifice. To break it is to offer yourself." Kael hesitated, his grip faltering for the briefest moment. Lysara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the shadow's taunts. "You speak of sacrifice, yet you forget the power of choice. Elythria's curse was born of betrayal, but we stand here united, ready to face the truth." The shadow turned its blazing eyes on her, its form rippling with fury. "You, the daughter of her grief, dare to defy her will. You are bound to the hourglass as much as he is." "Perhaps," Lysara said, her voice steady. "But I carry her legacy, not her hatred. The cycle ends with me." The chamber trembled, the shadow's form flickering as the sands in the hourglass slowed. Kael stepped forward, his sword lowered, but his resolve unshaken. "If a sacrifice must be made, then let it be mine. My life for the kingdom's freedom." Lysara's hand shot out, grasping his arm. "No," she said, her voice firm but tinged with something unspoken. "The hourglass demands blood, but it does not demand death. There is another way." Kael turned to her, confusion etched on his face. "What do you mean?" Lysara stepped toward the hourglass, her fingers brushing its smooth, glowing surface. "The curse is bound to both of us. It feeds on our connection, our shared purpose. If we both offer a fragment of our essence, we can sever its hold without losing everything." The shadow roared, its form swelling with fury. "You cannot defy the curse. It demands totality." But Kael ignored the spectre, his gaze locked on Lysara. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her expression softening. "This is what my mother could not see. Sacrifice does not mean destruction. It means giving something of yourself for the sake of others." Kael took her hand, their fingers interlocking as they faced the hourglass together. Then let's do it. The moment their hands touched the hourglass, a blinding light filled the chamber, and the sands froze in place. The shadow screamed, its form unraveling as the light consumed it. Kael felt a searing pain in his chest, as though a piece of his soul was being torn away. But he held firm, his grip on Lysara's hand unyielding. When the light faded, the hourglass was gone, its pedestal empty. The chamber was silent once more, but the oppressive weight had lifted, replaced by a calm, almost sacred stillness. Kael staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Lysara steadied him, her own face pale but resolute. "It is done," she said softly. The first rays of dawn crept through the windows, bathing the hall in golden light. Outside, the kingdom stirred, the darkness that had plagued it for generations lifting like a dissipating storm. Kael turned to Lysara, his voice hoarse but filled with gratitude. "You saved us." Lysara shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "We saved each other." As the sun rose over Elythria, the prince and the sorceress stood together, bound not by a curse, but by the choices they had made. The hourglass was gone, its legacy shattered, and for the first time in centuries, the kingdom was free. Yet as Kael looked into Lysara's eyes, he knew that their bond, born of sacrifice and shared purpose, would remain. A quiet, enduring miracle in the wake of the midnight hour.